Kalen DeBoer's SEC opener is here, and you couldn't have asked for a more grand matchup than this one, as the Georgia Bulldogs will come to Bryant-Denny Stadium for what some are calling the game of the SEC season. Helping us break it down, all things Alabama football, including this game in Tuscaloosa on Saturday night. Emily Grace McWhorter, who does a fantastic job with the next round, covering both things Auburn and Alabama, but of course zeroing in on the Crimson Tide this weekend. EG, appreciate you taking the time. It's a pleasure to have you on once again.
Absolutely. I love my time with you on this platform. I'm excited to kind of delve into this matchup because I agree this weekend of college football is a good one, and a large part of that is Tuscaloosa, Athens, Georgia, Alabama meeting together here inside of Bryant-Denny.
Yeah, all eyes, of course, on Tuscaloosa this weekend. Let's first, EG, touch on, though, what Bama's done at this point. 3 non-conference wins, first 2 against quote-unquote lesser competition, 63-0 in week 1, and then 42-16 in that South Florida game that was really, really interesting up to the fourth quarter. Then Bama goes on the road to Wisconsin, the big 42-10 blowout win. What's been your impressions of the Crimson Tide? Has anything surprised you, both positive and negative, and just overall takeaways from what you've seen through 3 games from Alabama?
Yeah, I think the biggest point of emphasis is how different those games have been, like you mentioned. No game has been very similar, and I think a lot of that is due to some injury that Alabama has been dealing with, specifically the offensive line. There hasn't been continuity at that position, and that was something that preseason, a lot of people were talking about how good this offensive line can be, and they have not had the same starting 5 there 2 weeks in a row. So now you have this 2-week bye, and I think that we will see, some similarities there against Wisconsin like we saw. But I think that is something that has surprised me is the depth of the offensive line isn't as deep as I think Alabama has been used to having in recent years. And then you have these young DBs that you're having to rely on. And, Coach Shepard had a great quote a few weeks ago. I asked him about how he gets those guys prepared for their first road test. And he said, they're not young guys anymore. That ended when the season started. And I think that's another case of this first SEC test. They're not young guys anymore. They're not relied on young guys. And a matchup that I'm looking at when it comes to this Georgia-Auburn matchup is how Alabama's wide receivers match up with Georgia's DBs, how Alabama's DBs match up with Georgia's wide receivers. So I feel like it's a different, position group for each. I wouldn't say that's a strength, and I know we'll get into the specifics, so I'm excited to chat about it. But I don't think that the DBs are necessarily a strength for Alabama, but I don't think the wide receivers this season are a strength for Georgia as well. So I think overall, holistically, I think that we also haven't seen the full production from Alabama yet. And Coach Womack has been pretty clear about that we've only seen a small volume going to Wisconsin. And I feel like similarly on the offense, we're going to see some things that we haven't yet seen in terms of offensive play calling and maybe some different routes, different plays, because this is what you prepare for, right? And I will say this. I just got out of meeting with the assistant coaches today, and the overarching theme from Monday to now is this game, and Kirby has been preaching this too, there's nothing inherently different about this game. In both facilities, they are preparing like this is just their next game. And then after this, they'll prepare for their next game. This is just a stop in the road. And I think that the fans have a tendency to really hype this up and the media, us, we really start hyping things up. But I can tell you firsthand in that facility, it's business as usual.
EG, I want to go back to the injuries because you mentioned on the offensive line, obviously that's been a big talking point for Georgia as well. They've got a couple guys banged up. They're probably going to be getting back out of the open date. So what's the latest with Bama? Again, you're in the building, like you mentioned. What's the latest in regards to the injury updates? Are there any that we don't know about? Is Alabama pretty healthy coming in this one? How does that look on the injury front?
Yeah, Alabama does seem pretty healthy. Malachi Moore got banged up, and that was, just some protocol that they were going through along with Cole Adams. But it seems like as of right now, I think the biggest one would be Quay Russo to see what he's going to be doing in that Wolf position. But overall, and you guys can go and look in Kalen DeBoer's press conference from Monday, he's actually been really great about giving an injury report before we even ask and being very thorough with it. And so it comes straight from his mouth. You can get more specifics. But from my perspective right now, it seems like everyone's in a pretty good position. And I think a lot of it has to do, though, with that 2-week the opportunity to kind of sit back. I don't want to say sit back, but relax a little bit, do some rehab, get guys in better shape.
So, EG, let's zero in on this matchup. You mentioned Alabama, Georgia. It's just another game, but it's anything but just another game. So let's start with the intangibles. Like you said, the things that we like to talk about, which the importance of this game, the gravity of it. Obviously, the season's not over for the loser. we got a 12-team college football playoff, and there are some mulligans on the schedule, if you will. But I've sensed this week that, because what I noticed was all the chatter was when Nick Saban hung it up, obviously, that we all kind of asked the question, who does this benefit most in the SEC? Who's going to slide in the number one spot? And everyone seemed to agree it's Georgia. It's Kirby. Like, this is what we've all been waiting for. Obviously, Nick Saban was the it's Georgia feels like they need to exercise the demons. They've got this Crimson Tide size monkey on their back. What's the mood amongst the Alabama fan base and those that are invested in the program? Because, again, there's kind of this chip on the shoulder, I feel like, being built for Alabama as well, where, people, how dare they think Georgia's going to slide in and take what's ours, which is the throne in the SEC. There's just this really interesting dynamic from both sides, but I'd imagine from the Bama side too, where it's about protecting the home environment, but also protecting Bama's place at the top of the SEC moving forward, under whether it's Kalen, DeBoer, or any other coach for that matter.
Exactly. And I think there's a few layers to this. And I want to start with, Kirby Smart's record, 1-5 against Alabama. But as someone in the media, as whoever's watching this, you have to decide, is that 1-5 against Alabama, or is that 1-5 against Nick Saban? And I'll let the people decide that. What you don't want, if you're Kirby Smart, along with the Georgia fan base, is to start 0-1 against Kalen DeBoer, because then it's not a Nick Saban, it is Alabama. And so I think that is a conversation that I've heard a lot of people discussing about, records and what that looks like. Coming into Tuscaloosa, though, this is the first time since 2007 that Alabama is an underdog in their own place. And who was born in 2007? You might have heard of him. Called Ryan Williams. He's 17, by the way.
I've heard he's 17. Yeah, a couple of times.
Yeah, we clarify that. 17-year-old Ryan Williams. And so it's interesting. There's a lot of different facets that go into this, but I think that one of those intangibles that you mentioned are, this is a game, and it was Coach Gillespie that said it a few minutes ago in there. Basically, you can't talk about Georgia without talking about Alabama. And I think that sums this up on Saturday. You can't talk about Georgia unless you talk about Alabama. And he said a beat later. And I think that's really interesting because it's true. These are two college football powerhouses that are built on talent, on excellent coaching, and really passionate fan bases. Now, obviously, the argument is Alabama's a little bit old money. Georgia's got new money coming in the last couple of years. But I think that the fan base is very bought into this because, like you said, there's something to prove. There's a chip on their shoulder. And I think it's an interesting, dynamic that Alabama is considered the underdog. 2.5 as of today. Have you checked what it is today? Has it moved at all? Last year it was 2.5.
I do not think it has moved. I think it's staying right at that number. That's
right?
2.5. Yeah.
Today's Wednesday when we're filming this. But those intangibles that you talk about, that's one of them. Is this a revenge game for the University of Georgia? It'd be hard not to think of it. Now, are the coaches going to say that? Absolutely not. Are the players going to say that? Absolutely not. But I'd be really curious what internally the conversations are surrounding these games, 3 days out.
E.G., you bring up, again, a fascinating dynamic that I didn't think about until you mentioned it. But, of course, Alabama has not been a home underdog since 2007. And, again, I guess that's probably more something for us to talk about. They're not going to, they're not preaching Vegas lines or anything in the building. But it is a very unique dynamic. There's a lot of people, certainly students, that are going to be going to a Bama game that have never seen the Crimson Tide come in as an underdog. So just something interesting to follow, and just a unique set of circumstances at Bryant-Denny for sure. Let's talk on the field, E.G., when Alabama has the football. Again, you've been in the building all week. I'm sure they've been talking about offensive game plan and what they hope to accomplish and execute. Jalen Milroe's been fantastic. Justice Haynes, Jam Miller in the running game. You mentioned Ryan Williams. I think Alabama has really proven themselves at this point, at least, again, through the 3 non-conference games. We'll see what happens. Now we're getting into SEC play. But one of the most explosive offenses, I think, in the country, if not the most explosive. Just talk about, again, more of what you've seen from Bama on the offensive side, how you think it matches up with Georgia. Because to your point, I think explosive plays and the ability that Jalen Milroe has to get outside of the pocket and utilize his legs are going to be a big part of this game.
Yeah, I think so too. Jalen is so athletic. It just comes down to it. And Kirby Smart said this week, it's like tackling a fullback. Teams really haven't been successful against it. One thing that's interesting to me about Alabama's offense is how they're going to utilize different receivers come Saturday, because I think Ryan Williams, we keep talking about him. He has been a favorable target, but I think that Georgia knows that, right? So who else is going to be the person that steps up to fill that gap? Is it going to be Jeremy Bernard? Is it going to be Kendrick Law? Emmanuel Henderson? I think they have a lot of options there. you mentioned the explosive plays. I actually asked Coach Sheridan about that and, kind of sustaining drives longer, what that looks like against the University of Georgia. And he said that it comes down to simple execution. That is something I have heard these coaches preaching since week one, simple execution of plays. And I think that the goal, obviously, for them is to have that on Saturday. You also have to look at this. Georgia hasn't allowed a single touchdown yet. And Alabama is built on explosive plays. What does that look like come Saturday? It's like a movable force against an immovable object. That's what it feels like. Coach Robinson said today that it's math, basically. Like, the game of football is math. And you've got these two forces that are meeting, and it doesn't seem like either one are movable. And so it's really funny to hear the coaches kind of get a little off track there and give us their analogies. But like I said, it's just Georgia's strengths and Alabama's strengths are very different. I think with Carson Beck, the key is you have to pressure him, because I don't think that these DBs have been tested yet like they will against a quarterback like him. And Christian Robinson actually compared him to Matthew Stafford when he was on the scout team, saying that he reminds me a lot of previous Georgia quarterbacks, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Murray, guys like that. I mean, he's a Heisman, front runner right now for a reason. And this is going to be the first true test for Alabama. Coach Womack's swarm defense. I think that the goal is going to be to pressure Carson Beck, take care of the football, and it's going to come down to who controls the line of scrimmage better. I do think that Georgia is banged up a little bit on both sides of that. That might come into play a little more than people might expect Saturday, but it's really just it's going to be a fun game of football to watch from a technicality. I feel like it's going to be very clean football too from these teams that we're going to see, not like USF, if you guys were watching that game for Bama. But I think it's going to be clean, fundamental, just sound football on Saturday.
Yeah, E.G., you mentioned the other side of the football when Georgia has it. I do think that's going to be interesting about, Alabama's secondary. It's still a bit of a question. I've been really impressed with Keon Sabb on the back end, the Michigan transfer. He's been really, really good. I feel like kind of a ball-hawking safety back there. You obviously know what Malachi Moore gives you. There's another great safety in this game, Malachi Starks on the Georgia side. The two Malachis will be dominating the game. But to your point, it's the offenses when you compare them. I mean, my biggest question for Georgia in this game is, can they find explosives? Because they haven't to this point. And, maybe against that Bama defense with the questions in the secondary. But to your point, no Tate Ratledge in this game for Georgia, a little bit banged up. So, I mean, talking to the defensive coaches, EGD, what are you expecting in regards to how they're going to attack Georgia's offense? Because it's potent, like it's in there, but we just haven't seen it yet to this point.
Right. And I think that you make a great point. I'm actually pulling my notes up from Monday when we got to talk to Coach Womack. But I think that one thing they're going to try and do, and I mentioned it, it's you have to pressure Carson Beck. You have to make him uncomfortable. And he's one of those guys similar to Milroe that he's not going to use his legs as much, but he can scramble. He can make those plays. He can direct traffic. And I think that shutting that down, I also think, the run game. Georgia, you have to shut down their run game. But I also think you could say that for Georgia's defense against Alabama's offense. There's strengths there on both sides that whoever can control that, like I said, that I feel like is going to be that point of emphasis. Another aspect that I want to bring to people's attention is time of possession. So Georgia and Alabama are actually almost identical. There's like a 30-second differential. I think Georgia's is averaging 29 minutes and 41 seconds, while Bama is averaging 29 minutes and 10 seconds. I asked Coach DeBoer about this. I said, hey, I want to give you the stat. Also, how big is this point of emphasis on Saturday? And he said it's such an interesting statistic when you start talking about time of possession, because like we talked about at the beginning of this, each game for Bama has looked so different. And yet, the scores have been what they have been. Time of possession included. It hasn't been great, but then it's been really solid. So I think that it goes back to who can control this game, who can control the clock, but also, as Coach DeBoer said on his teleconference today, you have to score points. And Georgia has not allowed that to happen yet.
E.G., I know you've mentioned a lot of them, but I'm going to ask you yet again, if you had to give a key to the game for Alabama, if they're going to come out of this one on top as, weird enough to say, home underdogs for the first time in 17 years, if Alabama is going to find a way to pull the quote-unquote upset, what's the key to the game for you for the Crimson Tide?
Before I say that, I do want to say, when I said that Georgia has not allowed that, they've not allowed touchdowns, they have allowed points to be had, but no touchdowns. But like I said, when it comes to keys to the game, I think that, Alabama has to take advantage of some mismatches. Alabama has to offensively move the ball, give Milroe time. rely on a few different facets and maybe expect guys to step up that, haven't had to yet. And I think that goes to those receivers. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. They're going to try and shut down Ryan Williams. It's a given. Pretty obvious. Who's going to be the guy that comes up behind him? Is it going to be Jeremy? Is it going to be Emmanuel Henderson, Kendrick Law, guys like that have to make a difference? Offensive line is going to be key, I think, against Georgia's D-line too, making sure that Miller has time, protecting the pocket, things like that. But we've said it 100 times now. I think that these two teams are just elite. It's going to be elite football. And I do think that it can go, either way. I don't really have a strong stance on who's going to come out with this win. Part of me doesn't like to be held to, predictions like that. But also I think that this is the best you're getting in football right now are these two teams. Obviously, make an argument for Tennessee, Texas as well. But when it comes to, an SEC classic matchup, this is what people want to watch.
I've been saying all week, EG, you don't have a pulse if you're not excited for this one. And that is certainly the case. Again, the best on best, the game of the year in the SEC, undoubtedly. Fun one before I let you go, EG. Myself and probably many others going to be making that first ever trip to Tuscaloosa. Give me an idea of what you expect the environment to be like on Saturday night.
I'm already a little overwhelmed. I'm down here today. It's Wednesday, and I'm thinking about all the things that we have to accomplish come Saturday, and it is going to be so much fun. You have so many people in town. Game days here. It's going to be absolutely electric. Thankfully, Alabama gives us media really good parking, so I don't have to worry about that. Right outside the stadium. That is one thing I was a little nervous about, but I do think that Tuscaloosa, I have really enjoyed my time down here. I also cover Auburn, and these college towns, guys, it's special. It just really is. And my first experience of Tuscaloosa was for Texas Bama last season. That was my first time I've ever been to an Alabama game. My first game working with the next round. Talk about, getting your feet wet quick. They threw me right into the fire. And it's just fun. Check out the Strip. There's some great spots too if you get down here early enough. Heritage House has great coffee, breakfast, a great little local place, and you really can't go wrong. Innisfree is a great place to hang out. Free game, but if you're coming down for the game, make it an all-day affair. You're going to have to with traffic, let's just be honest, but the environment's going to be crazy. I think that the students, one thing that I don't think a lot of people talk about too is, if you go to Georgia or Bama and you're from the state of Georgia or Alabama, you have so many connections to both of these universities. I know me personally, I do. I'm from Atlanta, and I know great people. Some of my greatest friends with the University of Alabama, some of my greatest friends with the University of Georgia. I went to Georgia Southern. But with that being said, there's so many personal connections when these two teams meet. And I think we're going to see a lot of Dog fans traveling for this game. And my family will be in town for it, which I'm excited about. But it's one of those environments that you kind of pinch yourself, and it's a blessing that I get to even get paid to go to this game, which is crazy.
EG, before we let you go, let the folks know what you guys are going to be up to this weekend under the Next Round Live. Going to be live on location in Tuscaloosa on Friday. So for those that are around the city, let folks know how they can check you out, maybe come say hello, support in person, and support throughout the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So today and tomorrow, business as usual. Come Friday, we'll be at the Rabbit Hole in Tuscaloosa. We're going to have a show from 11 to 2. I need to fact check that, but I'm pretty sure it's 11 to 2 or 11 to 1. But either way, come see us. We'd love to hang out. And then I will be on site come Saturday. I will be on the field. If you guys see me from the sidelines, let me know. We'd love to say hello. And then pregame, I'll be walking around. College game day will be here. So we'll be out and about, just wanting to meet anyone that we can. Give us your score predictions, things like that. We'll be doing some fun content ahead of time that always does well on social media. You guys know the kind I'm talking about, where we ask you score prediction when you might have had a few drinks in you, or we ask you your opinion on Kirby Smart, things like that. But it's going to be a good time. And like I said, check us out at Next Run Live. You can find all of what I've been up to this week in terms of Alabama and Auburn coaches interviews, players. It's all there. Had some great stuff today from some assistants. And now it's just the only thing left is to play the game.
Emily Grace McWhorter, the Next Round Live, does a fantastic job. EG, appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in Tuscaloosa this weekend.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.